In the year 108 AD, a Roman legion stood garrisoned in the fortress city of York in the far north of Britain. 5,000 heavily armed soldiers, veterans of countless battles, the pride of Rome's military machine. They were the Ninth Legion, Legio IX Hispana, and their eagle standard had flown over battlefields from Spain to Germany, from the Rhine to the wild frontiers of Britannia. And then, somewhere in the mists of time, they vanished. No final battle was recorded. No mass grave was ever found. The eagle standard that represented their honor simply disappeared from the pages of history. For nearly 2,000 years, the fate of the Ninth Legion has remained one of Rome's greatest unsolved mysteries. Tonight, we're going to uncover what really happened. We'll examine archaeological evidence, ancient texts, and modern discoveries to solve one of history's most enduring enigmas. The answer is far more complex and fascinating than the romantic tales of massacre that have captured imaginations for generations. This is the story of the lost Ninth Legion. To understand how the Ninth Legion disappeared, we first need to understand what they were. A Roman legion wasn't just an army unit. It was a self-contained military city, a machine of conquest that could march 20 miles a day while carrying 60 pounds of equipment per man. The Ninth Legion's history stretched back over a century before their disappearance. They were raised around 65 BC, possibly by Julius Caesar himself. Their surname, Hispana, meaning Spanish, likely came from their service in the Iberian Peninsula. By the time Rome invaded Britain, they were already battle-hardened veterans. In 43 AD, under Emperor Claudius, four legions invaded Britain with a clear objective: total conquest. The Ninth Legion was among them. For the next 6 decades, they fought to subdue this wild, rebellious province on the edge of the known world. By 71 AD, the Ninth had established their headquarters at Eboracum, modern York. This wasn't just a military camp. It was a fortress city with massive stone walls, sophisticated drainage systems, barracks, granaries, and workshops. The Ninth Legion turned York into a symbol of Roman power in the north. But Britannia was never truly conquered. Beyond the walls of York lay hundreds of miles of hostile territory, where tribal warriors waited in the forests and hills. And the Ninth Legion was about to learn just how dangerous that frontier could be. The year 60 AD brought a crisis that would haunt the Ninth Legion for generations. In the southeast of Britain, Queen Boudica rallied the Iceni tribe in a devastating uprising against Roman rule. The catalyst was brutal. After her husband's death, Boudica had been flogged and her daughters raped by Roman officials seeking to seize Iceni lands. The rebellion exploded with terrifying fury. Boudica's army, estimated at over 100,000 warriors, swept through southeastern Britain. They destroyed Colchester and turned toward London. The Ninth Legion, stationed in the north, rushed south to intercept the rebel army. Somewhere in the territories of the Iceni, probably in the fenlands of East Anglia, Boudica's warriors ambushed them. The legion's infantry was annihilated almost to a man. Out of perhaps 2,000 infantry who marched south, virtually none survived. Yet here's what's remarkable: the Ninth Legion wasn't disbanded. In Roman military culture, losing an eagle standard or suffering complete destruction usually meant the end of a legion's existence. But the Ninth survived. This tells us Rome desperately needed every legion they could field in Britain. The province was simply too dangerous to reduce the garrison's strength. Over the next few years, the Ninth was reconstituted with fresh recruits from Gaul and Germany. The legion was rebuilt, but the memory of that catastrophic ambush would have lived on. 20 years later, in 82 AD, disaster struck again. The Ninth Legion was stationed at a forward camp in southern Scotland during Governor Agricola's campaigns into Caledonia. Under cover of darkness, Caledonian warriors launched a surprise attack on their camp. The tribal assault broke through the defenses and led to brutal close-quarters combat. Only the arrival of Governor Agricola with reinforcements saved the legion from complete annihilation. The Ninth had suffered heavy casualties, and their reputation as an unlucky legion was reinforced. Yet once again, they were rebuilt and returned to service. This resilience speaks to Roman military pragmatism and the chronic shortage of troops in Britain. The province required a massive garrison to maintain control over a hostile population. The Ninth was needed, no matter how many times they had to be rebuilt. Here's where our story becomes a detective case. We know the Ninth Legion existed in the early 2nd century AD because archaeology gives us hard evidence. The question is, when do they disappear, and where were they when it happened? The last absolutely certain reference to the Ninth Legion being in Britain comes from a building inscription found in York, dated to between 107 and 108 AD. The stone records construction work carried out under the Legion's authority, proof they were still stationed at their fortress and functioning normally. Other evidence supports their presence in the early 100s. Roof tiles stamped with the Legion's name, military equipment, and tombstones all point to a unit operating as usual in the first decade of the 2nd century. But then something strange happens. Around 108 AD, references to the Ninth Legion simply stop appearing in documents from Britain. The Legion that had been a fixture of the British garrison for over 60 years vanishes from our sources. No dramatic final battle is recorded. No official announcement of disbandment survives. They just fade away. This silence has fueled 2,000 years of speculation. The most popular theory, the one that captured imaginations for generations, is that the Ninth Legion marched north into Caledonia to suppress a rebellion and was annihilated to the last man by Caledonian tribes. This theory gained massive popularity in the 20th century, particularly after Rosemary Sutcliffe's 1954 novel The Eagle of the Ninth. The image of 5,000 Roman soldiers marching into the Scottish mists, never to return, became one of history's most romantic mysteries. There's just one problem. There's almost no evidence to support it. No mass Roman burial site has ever been found in Scotland that could account for an entire legion. No contemporary Roman sources express shock at such a catastrophic loss. The archaeological record shows no signs of major upheaval or crisis around this time. If the Ninth Legion had been destroyed in Britain, we would expect to see some trace. The Romans were meticulous record keepers, and the loss of an entire legion would have been a major scandal. So if they weren't wiped out in Scotland, what happened? In 1924, an archaeological excavation in the Netherlands made a discovery that would eventually rewrite the story. At Nijmegen, researchers found a dedication stone that mentioned Legio IX Hispana. The stone was dated to around 120 AD, more than a decade after the legion supposedly disappeared from British records. The stone wasn't from Britain. It suggested that at least some members of the Ninth Legion had been transferred to the Germanic frontier, far from the Highlands where legends said they met their doom. Throughout the 20th century, more evidence accumulated. Inscriptions referencing the Ninth Legion turned up at various sites across the empire, indicating the legion or significant portions of it survived well into the 120s AD and possibly beyond. At Carlisle in northern England, archaeologists found wooden writing tablets from around 105 to 108 AD showing the legion going about normal business, supply requisitions, duty rosters, mundane administrative records. That what's significant is what happens after these dates. The archaeological record at York shows the 9th Legion's fortress was taken over by a different unit, the 6th Legion Victrix, which arrived in Britain from Germany around 122 AD, just as construction began on Hadrian's Wall. This timing is crucial. Emperor Hadrian visited Britain in 122 AD and ordered construction of the massive wall that would bear his name, spanning 73 miles across northern England. This was a major shift in Roman policy, an admission that complete conquest of Britain was neither achievable nor worth the cost. The 6th Legion arrived to take over the fortress at York. The question is, where did the 9th Legion go? The answer may lie 3,000 miles to the east. In the early 2nd century AD, Rome faced a series of crises in its eastern provinces. The Parthian Empire threatened Syria. Jewish populations in Cyprus, Egypt, and Cyrenaica erupted in devastating revolts. The eastern provinces were in flames. Emperor Trajan launched a massive invasion of Parthia in 113 AD, attempting to conquer Mesopotamia. This required legions from across the empire. Units were pulled from their stations to support the eastern campaigns. In 2015, Israeli archaeologists found roof tiles stamped with the mark of the 9th Legion at a Roman military camp in the Galilee region, dated to the early 2nd century. Finding 9th Legion tiles in Judea suggests that at least a detachment of the legion was stationed there long enough to construct permanent buildings. Trajan's Parthian War went badly. Initial successes gave way to supply problems, disease, and fierce resistance. By 117 AD, when Trajan died and Hadrian became emperor, the eastern provinces were in chaos. Judea would erupt in another major revolt, the Bar Kokhba Rebellion, in 132 AD. Could the Ninth Legion have been transferred to the east to deal with these crises? Could they have suffered such heavy losses that the legion was no longer viable? This theory would explain several puzzling facts. It accounts for why the legion disappeared from British records without any sign of catastrophe in Britain itself. It explains the Netherlands inscription from 120 AD, as the legion might have been in transit via the Rhine route. It accounts for the Israeli roof tiles. And it explains why the legion simply disappears from all records after the 120s. The evidence is circumstantial, but it points in a consistent direction. The Ninth Legion was most likely transferred from Britain to support operations on the eastern frontier, where it was worn down by continuous combat, disease, and attrition until it ceased to exist as a functional unit. The quest to solve this mystery has driven decades of archaeological investigation. The continued excavation of York has been particularly significant. What archaeologists have found is evidence of continuity rather than catastrophe. The fortress doesn't show signs of sudden abandonment or destruction around 108 to 120 AD. Instead, there's an orderly transition from one garrison to another. Buildings are modified and reoccupied in patterns consistent with routine military changeovers, not emergency evacuations. This argues strongly against the dramatic massacre theory. If the Ninth had marched out and been annihilated, we would expect to see traces of crisis at their home base. We don't see that. Excavations at sites north of Hadrian's Wall have also failed to find evidence of a major Roman military disaster. No mass graves, no concentrations of equipment that might indicate a battlefield, no physical trace of 5,000 soldiers meeting their end. We have Roman camps, marching camps, and lost equipment from various campaigns throughout Scotland. We can track the movements of Roman armies through physical traces. Yet there's no archaeological signature of the Ninth Legion's supposed destruction. The roof tiles found in Israel are significant but frustratingly ambiguous. They prove some element of the legion was in the region at some point, but they don't tell us how many soldiers, for how long, or what happened to them. Perhaps the most important evidence is what's missing. By the middle of the 2nd century AD, documents listing the legions of the Roman army no longer mention the Ninth. The legion had ceased to exist as a functional unit. After decades of investigation and debate, most historians have moved away from the romantic Scottish massacre theory. The current scholarly consensus is that the Ninth Legion was most likely transferred from Britain sometime between 108 and 120 AD, possibly to support operations on the eastern frontier. The legion may have suffered heavy casualties in campaigns against the Parthians or during suppression of Jewish revolts. Alternatively, it may have been worn down by continuous service in harsh conditions, gradually losing effectiveness until it was no longer viable at some point in the 120s or early 130s AD. Probably during Hadrian's reign, the legion was likely disbanded or merged with other units. This was done quietly, without fanfare, because there was no political reason to draw attention to it. Rome hadn't suffered an embarrassing military disaster that required explanation. A legion that had served for nearly 2 centuries had simply reached the end of its operational life. This explanation lacks the drama of massacre, but it fits the evidence. It explains why there's no archaeological trace of disaster in Britain. It accounts for the inscriptions placing elements of the Ninth outside Britain in the 120s. It makes sense in the context of Hadrian's military reforms and the crises facing the eastern provinces. The scholarly consensus is less satisfying than romantic legends. A legion gradually depleted and administratively dissolved is far less dramatic than 5,000 soldiers marching into the mist never to return. But it's almost certainly closer to the truth. Despite the scholarly consensus, the legend of the lost Ninth Legion maintains its grip on popular imagination. Rosemary Sutcliffe's The Eagle of the Ninth remains a classic, introducing generations to the mystery. The 2011 film The Eagle brought the story to new audiences. The legend continues to inspire. Why does this story resonate? Part of it is the inherent appeal of unsolved mysteries. We're drawn to gaps in our knowledge that invite speculation and imagination. The Ninth Legion's disappearance is one of those perfect historical mysteries where enough is known to make the question intriguing, but not enough to provide a definitive answer. But there's something deeper at work. The story taps into themes that transcend historical details. It's about the limits of imperial power, about what happens when civilization pushes into wilderness. It's about the hubris of conquest and the resilience of those who resist. In popular versions, the Ninth represents Roman military might at its peak, destroyed by Caledonian tribes in a reversal of the expected order. This narrative has obvious appeal, particularly in cultures where national identity is partly built on stories of resistance against invaders. The fact that this almost certainly isn't what happened doesn't diminish the power of the story. There's also something poignant about soldiers vanishing without trace. The Ninth Legion served Rome for nearly 200 years, fought countless battles, garrisoned dangerous frontiers. Their eagle standard represented their honor, their identity. To lose that eagle, to disappear from history without even a proper end, feels tragic in a way that administrative dissolution does not. The legend touches on our awareness of mortality and oblivion. All the soldiers of the Ninth Legion are long dead, along with everyone who knew them. They've been forgotten by time, reduced to fragments of stone and tile. The question of how they ended isn't just about historical accuracy. It's about whether their story, their service, their struggles matter. It's about rescue from oblivion. Let's be clear about what we know with certainty. The Ninth Legion operated in Britain for most of the 1st century AD and into the early 2nd century. They were stationed at York, responsible for holding the northern frontier. They suffered significant casualties at least twice, during Boudicca's revolt around 60 AD and during Agricola's campaigns in the 80s AD. Both times they were rebuilt. The last definite evidence for the Legion in Britain dates to around 108 AD. After this, references cease. The fortress at York was taken over by the 6th Legion around 122 AD when Hadrian's Wall was being constructed. Some evidence suggests elements of the Ninth may have been in Germania and Judea between 108 and 130 AD. By the middle of the 2nd century, the Ninth no longer appears in documents listing Roman legions. Whatever happened had occurred within roughly 15 to 25 years of their last confirmed presence in Britain. No archaeological evidence has been found of a catastrophic battle that destroyed the Ninth in Britain. No mass graves, no major battlefield remains, no contemporary accounts of disaster. These facts support the conclusion that the Ninth was transferred from Britain and met its end elsewhere, most likely through gradual attrition and eventual disbandment rather than sudden destruction. The story of the Ninth Legion is ultimately about the realities of imperial power. Rome conquered vast territories, but holding them required constant commitment of resources and lives. Legions like the Ninth spent decades on dangerous frontiers, fighting, building, and slowly wearing down. Some legions ended dramatically, destroyed in famous battles that echoed through history. Others, like the Ninth, simply faded away, depleted by disease, casualties, and the grinding attrition of continuous service. Their ending was less dramatic, but perhaps more representative of the true costs of empire. The romantic legend of the Lost Legion marching into the Scottish mists persists because it speaks to something in us, a fascination with mystery and tragedy. But the real story, of a legion transferred to distant wars and gradually ground down by the demands of empire, tells us something more profound about the nature of military service and the price of conquest. The Ninth Legion served Rome for nearly 2 centuries. They fought in some of the empire's most dangerous provinces. They were destroyed and rebuilt multiple times. They held the frontier against hostile tribes in one of Rome's most troubled provinces. And when they finally ceased to exist, it was not in glorious battle but through the quiet, unglamorous reality of administrative dissolution. Their eagle standard, symbol of their honor and identity, was never recovered. It remains lost somewhere in the vast sweep of history, buried in some forgotten battlefield or melted down for its gold by soldiers or scavengers who had no idea what it represented. The soldiers who served in the Ninth Legion have been dead for 1,800 years. Their names are mostly forgotten, their individual stories lost. But the mystery of their disappearance keeps their memory alive, ensuring that even in death, even in the absence of clear answers, the Ninth Legion is not entirely forgotten. That, perhaps, is the most fitting end to their story. Not a dramatic last stand, not a glorious final battle, but a slow fade into history punctuated by an enduring question. What really happened to the knife? We've examined the evidence, weighed the theories, and arrived at the most likely answer. But the mystery remains, and with it, the memory of Rome's lost legion endures.